Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
perfect.
Hi. And I would be speaking today on Ikigai and connecting it to the Indian sense of well-being, how it can be related or at all can be related or not. Well, the word Ikigai is not much commonly heard in India, and there is quite a ambiguity and differences among scholars related to the definition of the term Ikigai. But what I have read through the Japanese literature, I found ikigai is a very common word in Japanese context. In fact, T. Kondo has stated that ikigai is a kind of a sense of purpose and willingness and awareness that one is helping others, a sense that one something that may one want to something to live for, and that this can also be felt when one is being acknowledged by others. Whereas in the Western context, well being has generally been conceptualized as a combination of life satisfaction or cognitive evaluations of one's life situation and affective balance with the predominance of positive emotions over negative emotions. Now, ikigai is one such culturally specific well being term in Japan. It may have connotations like purpose in life or life worth living, although this word has shades of meaning that cannot be exactly captured in English. And this holds even true for the word ānandam, which comes close to English meaning of bliss and better quality of life, while explaining subjective well-being in Indian context of human existence and quality of life. Well, while reading through Hector Gracias and Francis Miralles' book, Ikigai, the Japanese secret to a long and happy life, I found that this Japanese concept translates roughly as the happiness of always being busy. And it is like logotherapy, but it goes a step beyond. It also seems to be one way of explaining the extraordinary longevity of the Japanese, especially on the island of Okinawa, where as I found from the book itself, there are some 24.55 people over the age of 100 for every 100,000 inhabitants. In fact, it is far more than the global average. Now, while explaining Japanese ikigai, it may be noted that this word consists of two kinds of awareness, namely an awareness of one's inner feelings and an awareness of self established through interactions with others. And it may be called as the introvert sense of perceived ikigai and the extrovert sense of perceived ikigai, respectively. Now, research in human relationships led us to discussion concerning public health studies, which pointed out the effect of social support on mental well being. Now, Cohen and Wills in the 1985 paper, namely Stress, Social Support, and the Buffering Hypothesis, in the journal Psychological Bulletin, remarked that people receiving social support can reduce their stressors and therefore succeed in dealing with stress. And research may lead to make an assumption that ikigai is the link between social support and perceived eudaimonic well-being. It is to be noted that the extent research on subjective well-being, especially eudaimonic well-being, has also recognized some kind of a social aspects of well-being. As Carol G. Riff has noted in his paper, Psychological Well-being Revisited, held that the concept of well-being includes the subdimension of positive relations, including having warm, satisfying, trusting relationships concerning about others' welfare. Social well-being involves five facets: social integration, that is being part of society; social acceptance, that is perceiving others as kind and industrious; social contribution, that is one's ability to contribute to society; social actualization, that is one's belief that society is improving; and social coherence, that is making sense of societal events. In fact, MEP Seligman in the book Flourish, a visionary new understanding of happiness and well-being, underscored the importance of positive relationships and particularly people's perception of having others in their lives who genuinely care about them. And then, in addition to identifying interpersonal elements in the well-being state itself, other research has identified interpersonal factors that predict personal well-being. And one of the most studied interpersonal predictors of well-being is perceived social support, which has been defined as people's subjective judgments about the availability of help from friends and family during times of need. Brian Lackey's review found a positive correlation in the chapter Perceived Social Support and Happiness. And he stated about a kind of a relation existing between perceived social support and social well-being. Interestingly, it is perceived support rather than enacted support per se that more closely relates to well-being. And a common explanation is the buffering thesis, namely that the more social support people perceive, the less stress they feel. Now, social support distinguishes between, may be distinguished between instrumental support, emotional support, appraisal support, and informational support. Now, instrumental support is defined as the provision of tangible goods and services or tangible aid. Emotional support involves the provisions of caring, empathy, love, and trust. Appraisal support involves the communication of information relevant to self-evaluation rather than problem solving. Ikigai is affected by social support, represent one's everyday mental state. Educators propose that every person should have a personal philosophy that shapes and guides their contributions to society. In other words, a strong Ikigai helps individuals, their children, and strengthens the development of society. And people without Ikigai experience kind of emptiness and anxiety, while those with Ikigai retain satisfaction, pleasure, ambition, even in harsh environment. Now, taking the well-being context in the Indian tradition, I found that the debate in Indian psychology and culture about the nature of happiness has centered on the source of happiness as either extrinsic, related to fulfilling desire and avoiding suffering, or intrinsic, focused on the cultivation of an intrinsic spiritual state of consciousness. The mundane domain of everyday life focuses on concerns about the nature of pleasure and pain, conditions of their occurrence, their relation and significance in life, and the strategies of enhancing pleasure and avoiding pain. The spiritual dimension focuses on ultimately going beyond the duality of pleasure and pain and reaching a state of enlightenment. And one of the Sanskrit terms for happiness is considered to be ānanda, and the nearest and approximate equivalent of that term in English is bliss, which is associated with spirituality. And this is distinguished from sukha, the happiness of a mundane variety. The opposite of sukha is considered to be the dukkha, or sorrow and the suffering. Although meaning in life is often centered in the extrinsic pursuit of sukha, a higher meaning of life needs to be focused intrinsically in ānanda. Now, because India has very amalgamations of different traditions, including the Vedic related and non-Vedic, now it becomes very necessary to point out how each has dealt with these issues. The Vedic tradition, which is supposed to be the most ancient of all, emphasizes the pursuit of ānanda with a positive note. Now, Rig Vedic verses, which are the most ancient, consist of poetic expressions of wonder and awe at the universe and many questions about the mystery of nature. There is a curiosity to know how the universe came into existence and what the first reasons of its existence was. In fact, the Vedic seers and sages embraced life in full, and the approach was positive. Now, with the evolutionary framework of human nature, meaning and purpose of human existence can become more personal, and consequently, the conception of well-being and good life depend on the evolutionary status of the individual. Indian sage and seers considered man not only as an organism having animal characteristics, but also as a being who has potentialities to achieve divinity, besides what are even universally considered as human characteristics. Thus, individuals may be generally of three kinds. Those who are more like animals, living a life of biological need satisfaction with attendant emotions. They are categorized as the demonic group, which we call in India as the Rakshasa Gana. Those who are human in the sense the term is generally used to differentiate man from animals. They are called the human group or the Manushya. And those who express divine qualities such as altruism, compassion, love, and transcendence, they are called the divine group, which also known as the Daiva Gana. What is intrinsic to this grouping is the evolutionary level of the individuals as understood and defined by Indian sage and seers. Therefore, Indian sage and seers formulated four major goals of human existence called the Purusharthas. They are the Dharma or the values, Artha, the wealth, Kama, the desires, and Moksha, the liberation. Dharma embodies the entire individual and collective values and incorporates all the virtues and strengths that have been currently examined by positive psychologists like Peterson and Seligman. Artha refers to wealth of all kinds, material and non-material, like intellectual property, immovable, and both the movable. Kama, on the other hand, refers to all kinds of desire, biological and psychosocial. Moksha refers to a possibility of stepping out of the cycle of life and death or rebirth, incarnation. While the first three are easy to comprehend, the concept moksha poses quite a bit of problem to the uninitiated in the Indian ethos and ethos. However, it is significant that the Indian tradition upholds moksha as the ideal purushartha to be attained by all human beings because that is considered as the ultimate in human evolution. Thus, depending on one's evolutionary status, people may consider pursuit of desire, karma, pursuit of wealth or artha, and pursuits of values or dharma and pursuit of liberation or moksha as a keynote of their life, either individually or in combination. The Indian sage and seers observe that pursuit of desire and wealth to the exclusion of pursuit for values and of liberation is a sign of lower level of evolution. Thus, a person who is in a lower level of psychological evolution may pursue karma and artha to the exclusion of dharma without any recognitions of moksha as a human possibility. Whereas another person who incorporates dharma as well may be considered to be more evolved. A third person who may subordinate pursuit of karma and artha to pursuit of dharma, and a fourth person who may pursue moksha while subordinating dharma, artha, and karma can be thought of as a more evolved than the first two. In fact, Indian seers and sages prescribe that one should fulfill one's desire or pursue wealth within the framework of dharma, which ensures the good of everyone. The Indian seers and sages upheld the pursuit of artha and karma within the framework of the dharma. And Kuppaswamy, one of the renowned scholar, Indologist, has translated the views of Manu on the relative value of dharma, artha, and karma, stating that some declare that the chief good of man consists in dharma and artha, whereas others place it in the gratification of karma and artha. Some say that it consists of dharma alone, while others say that it consists of artha alone. But the correct position is that the good of man consists of the harmonious coordination of the three, so that according to him, it is a combination of all the three that constitutes the chief wealth, the shreyas. The sages believe that men could make conscious and deliberate effort to evolve further from whatever level or group they are born to. Hence, they conceived the primary purpose of human existence as one of continuous self-refinement, the culmination of which is the ability to step aside from the cycle of birth and death, called moksha. They understood liberation as transcending all kinds of limitations, which involve freeing oneself from various types of attachments, identifications, and psychological conditioning, not only to external objects and events, but even to one's own mental states and body as well. And limit of this identification from body is expressed in Bhagavad Gita. Hence, the Indian sages focus more on ānandamaya kosha than on the ānandamaya kosha. Therefore, well-being and good life are to be achieved more in terms of minimization, restraint, and detachment from bodily need fulfillment rather than maximization, indulgence, and striving for need fulfillment. And such conception involved giving up and letting go rather than controlling, identifying, and holding on. Contentment or tushti was considered more important than tripti, pleasure, and sukha or happiness. The ultimate or ideal contentment in spouse was to be contained within self, with the realization of transcendent self. Hence, self-realization was accorded greater prominence than self-actualization. Practices which incorporated strategies of realizing the transcendent self came to be known as yoga. Thus, we have different systems of yoga suited to persons at different levels of evolution. The sages distinguished three gunas. They are called the sattva, rajas, and the tamas, and which represent principle of illumination of energy and of inertia. The Indian worldview holds that these principles operate in various combinations in the entire universe, in the structure and function of everything, including human beings. Thus, people are differentiated as sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic, depending on the preponderance of one of the three over the two. A sattvic person is described as one who has discriminative intellect, who is self-controlled, serene, equanimous, and steadfast, who is virtuous, generous, and gentle, who is detached and duty-bound without expectations, a seeker of self and aware of the unity underlying all diversities. A rajasic person is one who is driven into action by passion, restless, struggling, who has more desires, more strong likes and dislikes, and pursues sensory pleasures, who is attached to one's social roles, who is egoistic, and with having distorted understanding, who lacks clear discriminations. But the tamasic person is depressed, lethargic, disinclined to walk, negligent, undisciplined, arrogant, hostile, indecisive, and kind of inadvertent, uncertain, and even dull. It is to be noted that these three gunas are present in all the individuals, and it is the preponderance of one over the other which leads to the labeling of persons as sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic type. The human evolution involves increasing sattvic characteristics. So, in Indian in the traditional Indian conceptualization of the state of well-being, mental health appears to be regarded as an essential aspect of health. In any case, the concept of mental health is nearer to that of psychosocial well-being. The former is often defined in terms of adaptation to the environment and internal equipoise or equilibrium. And psychosocial well-being is a state of relatively good adjustments, feelings of well-being, and actualizations of one's potentialities and capacities. It is an essential element of Sukh Sharup or happy life. It's to be noted that any attempt at defining it inevitably has reference to socio-cultural environment. In some environments, stresses and demands upon the individual wrap him and induce mental illness, no matter how healthy he would have been under a happier environment. Thus, in understanding well-being, one has to take account of the nature of the environment in which the individual functions. In countries like Japan, China, South Korea, Singapore, both emotional support and appraisal support had an impact on person's reason for living. In other words, a sense of connectedness with others and receiving praise and acknowledgement are factors contributing to more Ikigai. Ikigai here is associated with the cultures and values of each country. In the US and India, social support apparently had no impact on one's personal reason for living, suggesting that people in these countries have a sense of Ikigai, whether they feel they receive social support or not, and that forces other than social support contribute to the sense of Ikigai. Now, not only the Japanese have the capacity to be recluse, there are artists and scientists all over the world with a strong, clear Ikigais. They do what they love during their dying day. The last thing what Einstein wrote before closing his eyes forever was a formula that attempted to unite all the forces of the universe in a single theory. When he died, he was still doing what he loved. If he hadn't been a physicist, he said he would have been happy as a musician. When he wasn't focused on physics or mathematics, he enjoyed playing the violin. Reaching a state of flow while working on his formulas or playing music, his two Ikigais brought him endless pleasure. In the Indian tradition, there must be, it is to be observed first that there should be a control over the senses is considered very essential. While total denial of needs is not implied, what is emphasized through and through is the maintenance of balance between extremes of satisfaction and denial, as also the adoption of a path of moderation. Secondly, realizing the inevitability of frustration, failure, as well as success, sorrows, and joys, it is repeatedly emphasized that not being overwhelmed by either is the essence of one's well-being. And lastly, adjustment does not so much consist of controlling and in exploitation of the environment as in maintaining a harmonious relationship with it. Here, the key concept is being in tune rather than conquering the environment. Thus, the values in child rearing that are likely to be emphasized and the behavioral qualities inculcated in the child through socialization and education for the sake of his well-being are likely to differ from culture to culture depending upon the worldview and the nature of man-environment relationship that is conceptualized. Therefore, in spelling out indicators for psychosocial well-being, cross-national and inter-community differences in conceptualization of well-being have to be kept in mind. So I thank you all for this patient hearing.